I sat across from Dr. Gregory Hayes at his mahogany desk and watched him sift through my meticulously compiled therapy notes with the casual dismissal of someone who had never spent sleepless nights worrying about a 16-year-old who refused to leave her bedroom. "You're just a therapist, not an innovator," he said sarcastically, his voice resonating through his immaculate office in Phoenix, Arizona. "This small anxiety remedy you've been experimenting with isn't particularly innovative. We'll include it in our routine procedures." I'm Talia Jackson, 34, and I've been a licensed clinical social worker at Sunnundale Mental Health Center for 6 years, specializing in adolescent anxiety disorders. What Dr. Hayes was so casually dismissing was not just tinkering. It was 3 years of developing what I called the adaptive response integration method, a therapeutic approach that had changed the lives of dozens of teenagers who had come to us thinking they couldn't get help. The method combined cognitive behavioral techniques with mindfulness exercises and peer support. But what set it apart was the structured way sessions built upon one another, creating what I called anxiety bridges, safe pathways for teens to cross from their fear-based responses to healthier coping mechanisms. But as I sat in Dr. Hayes' office that cold February morning, watching him dismiss my life's work with a wave of his manicured hand, I felt something darker than disappointment settle in my chest. I had seen teens who cut themselves develop healthy emotional regulation skills, and I had children who couldn't speak in group settings become confident advocates for their own mental health. Wasn't just another therapy protocol. It was a breakthrough that deserved recognition and proper implementation. Instead of consulting the papers, he continued, "The clinic will, of course, provide you with proper credit as a contributing team member," adding, "But this kind of innovation requires leadership vision, something that comes from administrative experience, not just therapeutic enthusiasm." He was already discussing rebranding the method and presenting it at the upcoming National Mental Health Conference under. I forced my expression to remain neutral, even as fury built behind my ribs like a pressure cooker reaching its limit. Dr. Hayes had never conducted a single therapy session since taking over as clinic director 3 years ago. His doctorate was in business administration, not psychology. He knew as much about treating teenage anxiety as I knew about performing brain surgery. Yet here he was, preparing to steal credit for work that had consumed every spare moment of my life. Work that had grown from my genuine desire to help kids who reminded me of my own anxious teenage self. Something told me wasn't just about professional recognition. It was about power, control, and the cash. The cruelty of someone who believed his position entitled him to claim ownership of other people's innovations up in a household where my mother struggled with untreated anxiety, which had shaped my entire career path. I remembered being 12 years old, trying to talk my mom through panic attacks while my dad worked double shifts at the shipping company. Back then, mental health resources were sparse, and the stigma around therapy kept my family from seeking help until my mother's condition became so severe she couldn't leave the house for months. Those experiences had driven me to pursue my master's degree in clinical social work. When I joined Sunnundale Mental Health Center, fresh out of graduate school, I was determined to create the kind of supportive environment my family had never found. The early warning signs had been subtle. He would attend my therapy sessions under the guise of quality assurance, taking copious notes but providing little feedback, and he started requesting detailed reports about my methods, claiming he wanted to document best practices for potential replication. I had been flattered by his interest, proud that my work was being noticed and valued, and I had stayed up late innumerable evenings typing up detailed summaries of my sessions, noting which techniques seemed most effective with different personality types. Dr. Hayes had initially seemed like an ally, as he was new to the director position, replacing the beloved Dr. Patricia Williams, who retired after 30 years of service. I had been observing my development of the adaptive response integration method from its inception, learning every element and knowing exactly how to replicate it without my involvement. He had been taking notes on everything from the peer support groups I had started to the specialized mindfulness exercises I had modified for teenage brains to the methodical progression of sessions that fostered resilience and trust. What I didn't realize was that Dr. Hayes was creating a case study not to support my work, but to appropriate it. "You're pouring your whole life into that place," he had said during one of our increasingly frequent arguments. "And what are you getting out of it?" My relationship with my boyfriend Kevin had suffered during this time. He was a paramedic and understood the demands of demanding careers, but even he had become frustrated with my long hours and obsessive focus on honing my therapeutic techniques. As I sat in his office that February morning, listening to him methodically dismantle my professional identity, I realized how foolish I had been to trust someone who saw my passion as a weakness to exploit rather than a strength to cultivate. I had dismissed his worries, thinking that my dedication would be recognized and rewarded. I had trusted Dr. Hayes when he praised my innovative spirit and promised that my contributions would be acknowledged appropriately. I had assumed that good work would speak for itself, that integrity and competence would ultimately prevail. 3 weeks later, I received an email invitation to attend the National Mental Health Conference as clinic support staff, and the agenda listed Dr. Hayes as the keynote speaker, presenting a revolutionary new treatment approach called the Hayes Integrated Response Protocol. As I read the session description, my heart sank. It was my method, word for word, with every technique I had developed over years of careful practice and refinement. Sitting in our small shared office, I stared at my computer screen, feeling as though someone had reached into my chest and twisted my heart in their fist. I was surrounded by colleagues who didn't even realize I was going through what felt like professional murder. Dr. Hayes had taken my innovation, my passion project, my contribution to the field of adolescent mental health, and he was getting ready to present it as creation to hundreds of mental health professionals. And the email said that clinic staff were welcome to attend the presentation to see how administrative leadership translates grassroots therapeutic work into systematic treatment protocols. The condescension was astounding. He was actually inviting me to watch him take my life's work and However, something changed inside me as I sat in that bathroom stall, wiping my eyes with rough institutional toilet paper, and the destruction started to change into something more focused and hard. Dr. Hayes thought he could take my work because he thought I couldn't stop him, and he saw me as just another disposable employee, someone whose innovations could be taken and repackaged with no repercussions. He was mistaken. I went back to my desk with a new purpose. If Dr. Hayes wanted to claim ownership of my therapeutic method, he would have to prove it worked as well as I had shown, and more importantly, he would have to keep up the thorough documentation and outcome tracking that had made my work so successful in the first place. I started to devise a plan that would take time and careful record-keeping, along with the kind of long-term strategic thinking that Dr. Hayes obviously thought I was incapable of. But I would continue to develop my method with a new purpose. I would create an unbreakable foundation of evidence that would eventually expose his theft and give my work the credit it deserves. The teenagers I treated deserved better than to have their progress become a footnote to someone else's professional aspirations. The Hayes Integrated Response Protocol represents a breakthrough in adolescent mental health intervention. Dr. Hayes told the crowded auditorium of mental health professionals at the National Mental Health Conference in Denver during the third week of March. Through careful integration of cognitive behavioral techniques with mindfulness practices and structured peer support, we've achieved remarkable outcomes in treatment-resistant populations. Dr. Hayes stood confidently at the podium, wearing an expensive navy suit that likely cost more than my monthly rent. I went as planned, sitting in the back row of the auditorium like a spectator at my own execution. As he presented my case studies, outcome data, and meticulously recorded progress notes, all of which had been repackaged as proof of his clinical genius and stripped of my name, I watched in sick fascination. The audience was riveted, and I could see heads nodding throughout the auditorium as mental health professionals took notes on techniques that I had developed through trial and error in countless therapy sessions. The anxiety bridge concept with the assurance of someone who had never actually guided a panicked teenager across one. He also described the peer support integration as if he had personally designed the group dynamics that had taken me months to perfect. How did you develop the confidence to try such an innovative approach with adolescent populations? Dr. Hayes asked a woman from the middle section during the Q&A period, answering questions about implementation strategies and outcome measurements with the fluid competence of someone who had studied my work in detail but had never really understood its emotional foundation. Teenage therapy can be very erratic. My stomach turned as he said, "Well, creativity necessitates a willingness to take measured risks. In my capacity as clinic director, I have the administrative control necessary to guarantee the safe and efficient implementation of novel strategies. It all comes down to having the leadership vision to perceive possibilities where others might only see obstacles." He was taking credit for not only my methods, but also the courage it took to develop them, and I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. He had never known the fear of trying an unproven technique with a suicidal teen. He had never felt the weight of responsibility that came with genuine care. And there he stood, accepting applause for bravery he had never shown. Following the presentation, I stayed near the back of the auditorium, watching as colleagues from other clinics approached Dr. Hayes with business cards and requests for collaboration, scheduling speaking engagements, discussing consulting opportunities, and establishing a professional network based solely on my stolen work. The injustice was so great that it felt like a physical burden on my shoulders. However, as I watched this professional theft unfold, I didn't feel defeated. Instead, I became coldly analytical. Dr. Hayes had made a critical mistake in his presentation. He had committed himself to replicating results that required a deep understanding of the therapeutic process, rather than a cursory knowledge of the techniques involved. More importantly, he had made these promises in front of hundreds of witnesses, mental health professionals who would be keeping an eye out for published research, tracking outcome data, and expecting the kind of rigorous follow-up that legitimate innovation required. I came away from the conference with a plan solidified in my mind. Dr. Hayes believed he had won by stealing my work, but in reality, he had given me the ideal opportunity to reveal his fraud. All I needed to do was keep refining my method with appropriate documentation, while he tried to keep up the appearance of proficiency using stolen techniques that he didn't really understand. Dr. Hayes was riding high on his newfound professional recognition, setting up interviews with mental health journals and accepting invitations to speak at more conferences, and he strutted through the clinic halls with the confidence of someone who thought he had successfully repositioned himself as a thought leader in adolescent mental health. However, what he didn't realize was that his theft had actually freed me from any obligation to protect his reputation or the interests of the clinic. Returning to Sunningdale Mental Health Center after the conference felt like entering enemy territory. I began documenting everything with the methodical precision of someone building a legal case. Every therapy session was recorded in detail, every outcome measurement was tracked with scientific rigor, and every innovation was time-stamped and witnessed by colleagues who could later testify to my ongoing development of the therapeutic method. I also made a crucial decision. I would continue refining and improving my approach while Dr. Hayes was stuck presenting the version he had stolen. Innovation doesn't stop just because someone steals your current work. I began developing advanced techniques, exploring new applications and pushing the boundaries. As I reflected on what the adaptive response integration method could achieve, Dr. Hayes was giving the same presentation at conference after conference. I was quietly evolving beyond what he had presented. My relationship with Kevin had reached a turning point during this period. The night I returned from Denver, I finally told him everything about Dr. Hayes's theft, my plans for documentation and exposure, and the professional betrayal that had consumed my thoughts for months. "Talia," he continued, seated across from me at our kitchen table, "I've been observing you for months while you lose yourself in this fixation. I know you're upset, but is getting even worth ruining your emotional well-being for?" I responded, "It's not about revenge, although I knew it wasn't totally accurate at the time. It's about professional integrity. He will continue to steal from other therapists if I don't reveal what he has done. This goes beyond my personal damaged sentiments." "Okay," Kevin replied at last. "If this is what you need to do, I'll support you." I could see him making a choice as he examined my face in the lamplight. "But swear to me that you won't become someone else in the process." That discussion was a watershed in my approach, and I began to intend. The irony was stunning. Dr. Hayes was attempting to monetize and scale techniques that he had never actually practiced, based on a theoretical understanding, but his public promises were creating a paper trail of commitments that would eventually become evidence of his fraudulent claims. Meanwhile, in interviews with professional publications, he was making increasingly grandiose claims about the effectiveness of his method, suggesting that the Hayes Integrated Response Protocol could revolutionize adolescent mental health treatment, if implemented widely. And he talked about licensing the approach to other clinics and creating training programs for mental health professionals. While Dr. Hayes struggled to maintain credibility with stolen material, I would lay the groundwork for an unshakable foundation of original research that would eventually expose his fraud and establish my rightful place as the creator of this therapeutic approach. I started to view Dr. Hayes's theft not as a devastating setback, but as an incredible opportunity, as he had unwittingly given me the ideal platform to demonstrate the difference between genuine innovation and academic theft. Dr. Hayes's facade began to show 6 months after the Denver conference, when he approached me with barely disguised desperation, asking for access to my patient files and session notes after a mental health journal requested follow-up data on the Hayes Integrated Response Protocol, specifically asking for outcome measurements and case studies that demonstrated long-term effectiveness. "Talia," he said, trying to maintain his authoritative tone while obviously fishing for information, "I need you to compile comprehensive data on our anxiety treatment outcomes for the past year. Our initiative will be highlighted in the fall issue of the Journal of Adolescent Mental Health." "Of course, Dr. Hayes," I said calmly, "but I'll need to review our data collection protocols to make sure we're providing accurate information." I turned to face him across his immaculate office, observing the stress lines around his eyes and the way his normally flawless hair displayed signs of anxious fingers running through it. "Which particular outcome measurements are?" He paused, perhaps hoping I would fill in the blanks. "Well, the usual metrics: success rates, patient satisfaction, long-term follow-up results." he said, waving his hand hazily. I see, I responded, maintaining a bland expression. And which protocol version should I concentrate on? The revised version we've been working on this quarter, or the old implementation from last year? This time, there was a longer pause. Dr. Hayes was unaware that I had kept improving the technique after he had stolen it. To him, therapeutic innovation was a one-time accomplishment, rather than a continuous process of improvement. Just use whatever data you have, he said at the end, his voice displaying the first trace of doubt I had heard from him. While Dr. Hayes had been traveling around conferences presenting stolen material for the past year, I had been working, late that night in the clinic, to organize my own thorough documentation, not to assist him with his data request. My advanced techniques included what I called anxiety archaeology, which helped teens identify the historical causes of their anxious responses, develop more focused coping mechanisms. I had thorough session notes, outcome measurements, patient testimonials, observations from colleagues, and, most importantly, evidence of ongoing innovation that went far beyond what Dr. Hayes had initially taken. Additionally, I had created specialized methods for eating disorders, social media-related stress, and anxiety disorders complicated by trauma, and these innovations were recorded with the same attention to detail that had defined my initial work, but now I was doing it fully aware of the legal and professional ramifications. The most important development was working with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a university researcher who had heard about my work through professional networks and wanted to do a formal study of my therapeutic approach, including peer review, statistical analysis, and control groups. Talia, she had said at our first meeting, what you've developed has the potential to significantly influence the way we handle anxiety issues in adolescence. Would you be open to co-authoring a study that details your approach and its results? It was the ideal moment. My work would be included in the academic record with appropriate attribution and thorough scientific validation if it were published in a peer-reviewed journal. More significantly, it would produce a timeline that would be made public and reveal Dr. Hayes's theft in comparison to his interviews and conference presentations. Working late that night to organize data and prepare materials for Dr. Walsh's research study made me feel genuinely excited about my career, something I hadn't felt since before Dr. Hayes's treachery. I was creating something that would completely outstrip my stolen work, not just protecting it. 18 months after Dr. Hayes's theft, Dr. Walsh and I submitted a study paper to the American Journal of Clinical Psychology, which was accepted for publication. Our research, Adaptive Response Integration Method, a novel approach to adolescent anxiety treatment with long-term outcome data, established a distinct timeline of innovation that preceded all of Dr. Hayes's public presentations and recorded 3 years' worth of patient outcomes. The mental health community responded right away to the release of the report. The disparities between Dr. Hayes's assertions and our published results prompted inquiries from colleagues who had attended his presentations. 6 months after publishing, Dr. Hayes's work, the Journal of Adolescent Mental Health, asked for clarification regarding the connection between our published approach and the Hayes Integrated Response Protocol. On the morning that the journal article went live online, I was summoned to Dr. Hayes's office. His professional demeanor had broken down, exposing the desperate guy within. He was holding a printed copy of our research report, and his hands were trembling a little. He said, "This is a serious problem, Talia," without the customary tone of authority in his voice. "You've created confusion in the field about our clinic's innovations. People are questioning the integrity of our programs." I sat across from him, feeling strangely at ease in spite of the moment's importance. I don't understand your concern, Dr. Hayes. The paper clearly documents my therapeutic method and its development timeline. All the data is accurate and verifiable. Your method, the clinic's intellectual property. You developed this work as an employee using our resources in our patient population. My employment contract stipulates that therapeutic innovations developed independently retain creator attribution rights. And I've also documented that this work was developed primarily during time using resources acquired. Actually, I responded, bringing out a folder I had prepared for this exact conversation. As he recognized the professional and legal ramifications, the color left his face. 3 weeks following the publication of our study, the investigation got underway. A formal investigation into claims of academic fraud and intellectual property theft was started by the National Mental Health Professional Ethics Board. While the clinic's board of directors carried out their own internal review, Dr. Hayes was put on administrative leave. The evidence was overwhelming. I had kept thorough records of the evolution of my methodology, complete with witness statements, timestamps, and documentation of each invention. In contrast, Dr. Hayes was unable to demonstrate how he had contributed to the therapeutic technique he claimed to have developed. Almost immediately, the clinic's financial situation deteriorated. Dr. Hayes's purported inventions had earned Sunnendale Mental Health Center large funding, which had to be reimbursed once the scam was discovered. A financial issue that jeopardized the clinic's entire business resulted from insurance companies starting to doubt whether treatments given under fake credentials would be paid. The opinions of my coworkers were divided. On my behalf, a few voiced their indignation at having unwittingly contributed to the promotion of stolen work. As the clinic's image deteriorated, others were more worried about their personal job security. Some acknowledged that they had thought Dr. Hayes's statements were too wonderful to be true, but they had refrained from speaking up because they were afraid of his position. One evening, Kevin discovered me reading another email from a reporter, asking for interviews regarding the scandal in our kitchen. He inquired, "How does it feel?" He asked, "Getting your recognition back?" I gave it careful thought. While the professional confirmation was gratifying, the restoration of my integrity and the affirmation of each adolescent whose advancement had been marginalized in someone else's career, aspirations felt more important. It feels like justice, I concluded, not just for me, but for every patient whose story was stolen along with my work. My retaliation was most appropriate when it elevated the work to its rightful place in the field of treating teenage mental health issues rather than ruining Dr. Hayes's career. I came to the realization that Dr. Hayes had unwittingly given me the greatest gift imaginable as I thought back on this protracted journey from theft to vindication, the drive to demonstrate that true innovation always wins out over academic fraud, and that sometimes the most effective form of retaliation is just letting the facts speak for themselves.